This story begins with a small family driving through the woods, excited for a little adventure. But suddenly, a deer jumps right in front of their car, and everything changes in an instant. There's a terrible crash, and from that accident, only one person survives, a little boy named Pete. Confused and terrified, he cries for help, but no one answers. With shaking hands, he picks up his storybook from the broken car, puts it inside his backpack, and starts walking alone into the forest. Just then, he hears something moving in the bushes. Frightened, Pete runs deeper into the woods, but a pack of wolves starts chasing him. As he runs for his life, he suddenly sees a giant green creature, a dragon. The dragon steps between Pete and the wolves, protecting him. Scared, Pete whispers, Are you gonna eat me? But instead, the dragon gently nudges Pete's bag toward him, as if saying, You're safe with me. Slowly, Pete realizes this creature is not a monster, but a friend. He names him Elliot, and Elliot carries Pete away into the forest. 6 years later, the story shifts to a nearby town. A man named Meacham sits surrounded by children, telling them tall tales about a dragon living deep inside the forest. He swears he saw it with his own eyes, but nobody believes him. They think it's just another story. Suddenly, his daughter Grace Meacham walks in. She's a forest ranger, smart, brave, and very practical. She smiles and tells him, Dad, I've been in these woods for years, and I've never seen a dragon. Meacham replies gently, Just because you don't see something doesn't mean it isn't real. Grace leaves, still unconvinced. Back in the forest, Pete has grown up wild and free. He and Elliot are inseparable, running, playing, laughing together like brothers. We soon learn that Elliot has a magical ability. He can turn invisible. That's why no one has ever seen him. One day, while they're returning to their cave, they hear someone approaching. It's Grace. Elliot immediately disappears using his magic, while Pete quietly follows her through the woods. Grace and a logging crew are marking trees that are supposed to be cut, but Pete sees something shiny in her bag, a compass, and he sneaks up, steals it, and runs back to his cave. That night, he reads his storybook beside Elliot, and they fall asleep together like family. The next morning, Pete wakes up alone and hears chainsaws. He runs to investigate and sees Gavin, a logger, cutting trees he shouldn't be touching. Grace and her husband Jack rush in, stopping him. Jack's brother Gavin argues, but they leave with Grace's daughter Natalie. Natalie soon spots Pete watching them. Curious, she follows him. Pete tries to hide, climbs a tree, and Natalie climbs after him, but she doesn't know how. She slips and hangs dangerously from a branch. Pete tries to help her, but they both fall to the ground. Natalie gets hurt. Before Pete can escape, everyone arrives. Jack demands answers. What were you doing in the woods alone? Natalie points to Pete. I followed him. Grace is shocked. Pete looks like a child who's been living in the wild for years. She asks gently, Who are you? Where are your parents? Do you live out here alone? Grace notices the compass around his neck, the same one she lost. When she reaches for it, Pete panics and runs, but Gavin grabs him. Pete slips, hits the ground, and loses consciousness. Far away, inside the forest, Elliot senses something is wrong. His friend is in danger, and he won't rest until he finds him. Meanwhile, Grace rushes Pete to the hospital. Deep in the woods, Elliot senses something is wrong. Furious and desperate, he crashes through the forest and drops an entire tree onto Gavin's logging crew. Gavin realizes something big is out there. He grabs his men and heads back into the forest to hunt it. At the hospital, Pete finally wakes up. He looks around, overwhelmed by bright lights, machines, and strange faces. Grace talks to the doctor, who tells her, He's stable now, he'll be all right. Grace then asks a police officer, How is a child living alone in the woods? The officer replies, We'll investigate who he is, and if we can't find his family, he'll be placed with child services for now. Pete hears everything. His eyes fill with fear. He doesn't want a new home, he wants Elliot. So the moment no one is watching, he runs. In another room, Natalie finishes her treatment. She walks over to check on Pete, but his bed is empty. She immediately alerts everyone. Pete runs through the busy streets. He's never seen cars, buildings, or crowds. Everything feels terrifying and strange. He calls out for Elliot again and again. Right when Pete is about to run into traffic, Grace catches him. The moment her hand holds his, Pete suddenly feels something he hasn't felt in years. Safety, warmth, family. Back in the woods, Gavin sees an enormous footprint, but no creature. Something invisible is standing right there, Elliot. He watches them leave, hidden by his magic. Grace takes Pete to her house. Pete tries to escape again, but Grace gently stops him and kneels to his level. She tells him, You know, I was like you. I loved the forest too. I felt safe there. That's why I protect it now. She promises, Tomorrow we'll go look for your home, together. Pete slowly begins to trust her. After 6 years of surviving alone, it's the first time he experiences kindness, warmth, and care. He starts laughing, eating, and even talking a little. Grace and her family brighten his broken world. That same night, Gavin continues his hunt with his crew. They stumble on a cave beneath a fallen tree, Pete and Elliot's home. Inside, they find Pete's storybook. Just when Gavin tries to take it, Elliot attacks. The dragon roars, angry and protective. The men run for their lives and jump inside their truck. Elliot grabs the truck like it weighs nothing. Gavin shoots, but Elliot breaks the gun like a toy. He could kill them, but he doesn't. He lets them escape because he needs them to find Pete. He begins following the truck into town. At Grace's house, the family grows attached to him. They don't know how deeply Pete is missing Elliot. Then Grace receives a call. The officer tells her, Pete's parents died in a car crash 6 years ago. He's been alone in the woods ever since. Child Services will take custody starting tomorrow. Grace is shocked and heartbroken. She can't imagine sending him away after everything he's endured. Natalie, curious, asks Pete, "Who's Elliot?" Pete smiles sadly, takes crayons and draws him. A big magical green dragon. "He's my friend." Elliot roams through the city, desperately searching for him. His giant, invisible footsteps echo through the streets, but no one sees him. He just wants his boy back. At home, Natalie looks at Pete's drawing and says, amazed, "This is a dragon. My dad used to tell us stories about dragons just like this." She shows Pete the North Star and says, "Dad says dragons live up north. If you follow that star, that's where their real home is." Just then, Grace walks in and asks Pete to talk privately. Grace kneels beside him and thanks him gently. "Thank you for returning my compass. It was my dad's. My whole family is in that picture." She then softly asks, "Pete, how did you end up in the woods?" Pete looks down and quietly tells her everything. The car crash, losing his parents, and how scared he had been. Grace's eyes fill with emotion. She tells him, "When I was your age, I lost my mom too. I know what it feels like to hurt like that. But you're not alone anymore. I'm here for you." Pete shakes his head. "I'm not alone. I have Elliot." Grace asks, confused, "Who's Elliot?" Pete proudly holds up his drawing. "Elliot is my friend, a dragon." Grace freezes. The picture looks exactly like the one her father used to describe. Pete smiles and says, "If you come to the forest tomorrow, I'll show you. You'll meet Elliot." Elsewhere, Gavin tries convincing Jack to help him hunt and capture a dragon. Jack laughs it off. He doesn't believe him. Furious, Gavin grabs his gear and storms into the woods with his crew. What Gavin doesn't know is that Grace overhears everything. Her father's stories suddenly don't feel so crazy anymore. Elliot eventually reaches Grace's house. Through the window, he sees Pete sitting with Grace, Jack, and Natalie, laughing, smiling, reading stories together like family. For the first time, Elliot realizes Pete might not need him anymore. His ears droop, his eyes lower. Heartbroken, Elliot quietly turns back to the forest. He goes to their cave and curls up alone, sad, abandoned, like he lost his family all over again. He compares it with his old sketch. It's the same dragon. Grace asks, "Tell me the truth. What did you see in the forest that day?" Her father finally admits, "I was out hunting. The sky went dark, and there it was, a dragon right behind me. I was terrified. I pointed my gun at it, but it didn't attack. It was a miracle, something I'd never seen before." Grace asks, stunned, "How did I never see it in all these years?" Her father smiles, "Well, you never saw Pete either." The next morning, Grace takes Pete, Natalie, and her father into the forest. She chooses not to drop Pete at the foster home. Instead, Pete leads them deep inside until they reach his treehouse. Grace has never seen this part of the forest before. Pete runs inside the cave and returns with Elliot. Grace, Natalie, and her father freeze, faces filled with awe. Natalie bravely touches his fur. Elliot hums softly, happy the kids trust him. Grace's father tears up. His stories were real, but the moment is shattered. Gavin and his men ambush them. They fire tranquilizers. Elliot panics and tries to protect Pete. Pete fights them, hitting and kicking, trying to free his friend. Elliot almost breaks free but collapses from the sedatives. They wrap him in chains, load him onto a truck, and drag him to a warehouse. Jack calls animal control, wanting someone responsible to help, but Gavin snaps at him. "No, he's mine. I found him. I'll be famous. I'll make millions." He doesn't see a friend. He sees a trophy. Pete is heartbroken. With tears in his eyes, he pleads, "Please, let us go. We won't bother anyone. No one will ever see us again." Grace didn't know anything about this. She never planned to hurt him. Meanwhile, forest officers arrive at Gavin's warehouse, but Gavin stands in front of Elliot like a trophy and says, "You can look, but he's mine. I found him. I discovered him. He belongs to me." Natalie secretly shows Pete a small pipe leading inside the warehouse. The two crawl through the pipe and reach Elliot. Pete's eyes fill with pain when he sees his best friend chained like a monster. Outside, officers try to open the gate, but it's locked from inside. Natalie had locked it. The kids quickly unchain Elliot and try to help him fly, but he's too weak to take off. The moment Gavin and the officers break in, they find the room completely empty. They think Elliot escaped. They rush outside to hunt him, but Grace suddenly arrives and finds the kids, her father and Elliot, still in the warehouse, perfectly invisible. Elliot had used his magic to hide them, breaking open the warehouse and dragging the truck into the street. He speeds toward the woods. Gavin, Grace, Jack, and the officers race after them. Gavin pushes forward and blocks the truck with his car. Grace's father tries to brake, but the brakes have failed. Gavin panics and swerves out of the way. The truck crashes through his vehicle and races onto the bridge. Elliot jumps off and lands on top of the bridge, but he sees everyone chasing him. Panicked, terrified, Elliot starts breathing fire to scare them away. Grace and Jack's car gets caught in the flames and begins sliding toward the edge. Gavin desperately tries to help them, but the fire blocks his way. Pete screams to Elliot, "Stop! They're good! Help them! They didn't mean to hurt you!" Elliot hears him. He swoops down and grabs the car, just before it falls. But the burning bridge collapses, and Elliot, Grace, and Jack plunge into the ravine. Natalie and Grace's father scream in horror. They think they've died. Pete, trembling but hopeful, whispers, "He'll save them. I know he will." Then, Elliot soars out of the smoke, carrying Grace and Jack on his back. Everyone watches in awe. Even Gavin realizes his terrible mistake. Before anyone can say a word, helicopters approach, ready to capture Elliot. Pete quickly climbs on Elliot's back and they fly away into the forest. Grace watches them disappear. Her heart breaks. She had grown to love Pete like her own son. Back in the woods, Pete and Elliot find their treehouse destroyed. Pete asks, "Broken, where will we live now?" Elliot replies sadly, "We can't stay here anymore. They know about us. We'll have to hide again like before." Pete looks at his storybook and says softly, "Maybe I should stay. Maybe you should be with a family too." Pete can't hide forever. Elliot hugs him tightly. Neither wants to let go, but it's time. Grace returns home, crying quietly. But when she arrives, Pete and Elliot are standing outside. Pete runs into her arms. Grace holds him like he's her own. Elliot watches them one last time, then spreads his wings and flies away forever. Days pass. Months fade. The world forgets about the dragon. He becomes nothing more than a ghost story. But Pete remembers. Grace and Jack adopt him. They're a real family now. Sometimes, under the starlit sky, they travel north to visit Elliot near the North Star. Now both families, one human, one dragon, live free, loved, and happy. If this friendship touched your heart, hit like, share it with someone you love, and subscribe for more stories that remind us we're never alone.